There is a man in the Bible who never died. Not died and was resurrected, not died and ascended after death. The text says something stranger and considerably harder to explain than either of those familiar patterns, that he walked with God, and then, simply, he was not, because God took him. No tomb is described anywhere in Scripture. No burial, no final deathbed words recorded for later generations to remember. Just a short sentence in Genesis, 5 verses long in total, describing a man who lived, who walked faithfully with his God across centuries, and who simply one day was no longer counted among the living because heaven itself had reached down and taken him. His name was Enoch, and Genesis gives him only 5 verses. But outside the Bible, in texts Jewish communities preserved carefully for centuries, in ancient scrolls buried in caves near the Dead Sea and rediscovered only in the 20th century, Enoch's story does not end with 5 modest verses. It expands into something enormous, detailed visions of coming judgment, guided journeys through the structure of the heavens, and a mysterious figure called the Son of Man, appearing, remarkably, centuries before the Gospels would ever use that exact title for Jesus of Nazareth. What did Enoch actually see in the years before heaven took him? And why did a story the Bible tells in 5 brief sentences become one of the most influential visionary texts to survive from the entire ancient Jewish world? We need to be precise from the very beginning of tonight's investigation about exactly what kind of story this is and what kind of claims we can responsibly make about it. First, Enoch is not part of the Hebrew Bible. It is not part of the Protestant, Catholic, or most Eastern Orthodox biblical canons, though remarkably and importantly, it is treated as genuine scripture within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest continuously operating Christian communities in the entire world. It was written by unknown authors, working centuries after the biblical Enoch would have actually lived, composing in his name and adopting his voice, following a common and widely accepted ancient literary practice known as pseudepigraphy. We are not going to claim tonight that this text was deliberately suppressed by some ancient church conspiracy, or that it secretly contains hidden truths the institutional church intentionally hid from ordinary believers for centuries. Its real history was considerably more complicated than that simple narrative, and, as we'll see, considerably more interesting too. What we will do instead is carefully trace how 5 short verses about a man who walked with God gradually became, in the hands of later Jewish visionaries, an entire cosmic journey, one that meaningfully shaped Jewish apocalyptic thought for centuries, appears directly quoted in the New Testament itself, and offers modern readers a rare, genuinely ancient window into how early believers imagined divine judgment, the structure of the heavens, and the ultimate fate of the world. To understand why Enoch's brief biblical story eventually exploded into such an enormous later tradition, we first need to understand exactly what kind of book Genesis actually is, at the specific point where Enoch first appears within it. Genesis chapter 5 is what biblical scholars call a genealogy, a formal, deliberately repetitive list of names, ages, and deaths, carefully tracing the human line from Adam all the way down to Noah. Each individual entry in this list follows the exact same rigid literary pattern. So-and-so lived a certain number of years and had a son, and then lived a certain number of additional years and had other sons and daughters besides, and then died. 10 distinct names appear in this particular genealogy. 9 of them follow the established pattern exactly, each entry ending with precisely the same grim final word, repeated again and again like a drumbeat: died. The 7th name in the list breaks this rigid pattern entirely, in a way that would have been immediately, unmistakably obvious to anyone hearing it recited aloud. Enoch lived 65 years and had a son, whom he named Methuselah. And then the text tells us, Enoch walked with God after the birth of his son, continuously, for 300 additional years, and all the days of Enoch's life, added together, were 365 years in total. And Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, for God simply took him. In a chapter built almost entirely around the relentless drumbeat of human mortality, lived, died, repeated 9 separate times, one single man simply does not die at all. To ancient listeners steeped in this genealogy, hearing it recited aloud together as a community, that sudden break in the expected pattern would have landed with real, unmistakable force, like a thunderclap in an otherwise predictable sky. It's also worth noting a detail ancient readers would very likely have caught immediately, even if modern readers often miss it. 365 years, precisely matching the number of days in a solar year, was almost certainly not lost on ancient audiences, particularly those already interested in calendars, astronomy, and cosmic order more broadly, a detail that later expanded Enoch traditions would go on to build directly upon. A man who did not die, in a text otherwise obsessed with recording exactly how long everyone lived before dying, a specific number tied unmistakably to the movement of the sun through the sky. In a world genuinely hungry for signs of something lying beyond ordinary human experience, this was remarkably fertile ground for later imagination to take root in. There is one more small detail worth noting from this same genealogy, easy to overlook, but frequently discussed in later Jewish tradition. The name of Enoch's son, Methuselah, whose own name some ancient interpreters connected to a Hebrew phrase suggesting something like, "When he dies, it shall be sent," read by some later rabbinic and Christian commentators as an oblique reference to the flood arriving in the very year of Methuselah's death, based on the careful chronological math embedded in the genealogy itself. Whether or not this particular etymology is linguistically sound, a question modern scholars debate, the fact that later readers went looking for hidden meaning, even in a name buried within a genealogical list, illustrates just how closely and how creatively ancient communities read every available detail in these brief, spare verses. The text that eventually grew from this fertile ground is genuinely enormous in scope. Several distinct sections, likely composed by different, unrelated authors across roughly 3 centuries before Christ, later gathered together and collected under Enoch's shared name. The earliest section, known to scholars as the Book of the Watchers, which we've explored in earlier investigations in this series, describes rebellious angels corrupting the earth in the years before the Great Flood. But this same section also contains something else entirely. Enoch himself is commissioned as an intercessor, sent to plead the rebellious watcher's case directly before God, and is then taken on an extended, guided tour of the cosmos, shown the hidden storehouses of the winds, the resting places of the stars between their appointed movements, the outer boundaries of the earth itself, and, most strikingly of all, a burning mountain of fire, where he is told the disobedient stars and rebellious angels alike will eventually be imprisoned until the day of final judgment arrives. This is not incidental decorative detail added for dramatic effect. This is, in fact, one of the earliest surviving examples anywhere of what scholars now call apocalyptic literature, a distinct literary genre built specifically around a single human visionary being, taken up into the heavens, shown hidden cosmic realities normally invisible to mortal eyes, and then returning to earth with knowledge meant to prepare the faithful for a coming, decisive judgment. This particular genre would go on to shape Jewish and later Christian religious thought for many centuries afterward, eventually producing texts like the later visions found in the biblical book of Daniel, and ultimately, generations later still, the New Testament's own book of Revelation. But it is a later section of 1 Enoch specifically, a portion scholars generally refer to as the Book of Parables, or sometimes the Similitudes, that contains the single detail most likely to genuinely surprise readers familiar only with the New Testament's own account. In this particular section, Enoch is shown, in vivid visionary detail, a heavenly figure seated on a throne of glory, given explicit authority to judge all of humanity, described repeatedly throughout the text by one especially striking, recurring title, the Son of Man. Before turning to that title directly, it's worth pausing on the broader tour of the heavens itself, because the level of cosmic detail in the Book of the Watchers is genuinely remarkable for a text this ancient. Enoch is shown, according to the text, the specific chambers where the winds are stored before being released across the earth, the precise mechanisms governing the movement of the sun and moon through the sky, and the boundaries separating the visible world from realms not normally accessible to any human observer. Some scholars have noted that portions of this material function almost as a kind of ancient cosmology or proto-scientific treatise, attempting to systematically account for natural phenomena, thunder, lightning, the changing seasons, within a coherent theological framework, alongside its more overtly moral and eschatological concerns. This blending of what we might now separate into natural philosophy and prophecy was entirely typical of ancient visionary literature, which saw no meaningful division between understanding the physical structure of the cosmos and understanding its moral and spiritual order. Here, the investigation reaches its most historically significant and also its most carefully, genuinely debated moment. Son of Man is, of course, the specific title Jesus uses to describe himself considerably more often than any other title throughout all 4 Gospels combined. For generations, careful readers have asked where exactly this particular title originally came from and what it would plausibly have meant to an ordinary first-century Jewish audience actually hearing Jesus use it in conversation. The Book of Parables within 1 Enoch offers one genuinely important piece of that larger puzzle. In this specific text, the Son of Man is described as a pre-existent, fully heavenly figure, deliberately hidden before the moment of creation itself, revealed only at God's appointed time, seated in ultimate judgment over kings and the mighty of the earth, functioning as a source of light for the surrounding nations and a source of real hope for the righteous who have suffered unjustly. This is a genuinely significant historical detail worth sitting with carefully, not proof, it should be said clearly, that Jesus or the Gospel writers directly and consciously drew on this specific text as a source. but it is strong evidence that Son of Man, by the 1st century, already carried a rich, developed set of theological associations for at least some segments of Jewish audiences, well beyond its simpler, more limited usage found elsewhere in the Hebrew Scriptures, such as in the book of Ezekiel, where the same phrase functions largely as a straightforward way of addressing a human prophet directly, without any of this later cosmic weight attached to it. Scholars remain genuinely divided on the precise historical relationship between the parables of Enoch and the New Testament's own Son of Man sayings, partly because of an ongoing, unresolved scholarly debate about exactly when the parables section was actually composed. Unlike other sections of 1st Enoch, no fragments of the parables specifically have ever been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, a genuinely significant absence that has led some scholars to date this particular section considerably later than the rest of the collection, possibly even into the 1st century after Christ, which meaningfully complicates any simple, one-directional claim of influence running clearly in either direction. What is not seriously in dispute, however, is this central point. Well before, or at the very least alongside, the writing of the Gospels themselves, at least some significant strands of Jewish apocalyptic thought were already actively imagining a heavenly, pre-existent judge called specifically the Son of Man. That is the rich, textured religious world the Gospel's very first audiences were listening from, whether or not they had read 1 Enoch directly themselves. It's worth adding one further layer of nuance here, because the scholarly conversation around this dating question has shifted over time. Earlier generations of scholars, working before certain manuscript discoveries were fully catalogued and analyzed, sometimes assumed the parables were composed considerably earlier, comfortably before the time of Jesus, which made a direct line of influence from Enoch to the Gospels seem relatively straightforward. More recent scholarship, weighing the absence of parables fragments at Qumran alongside other internal evidence within the text itself, has generally pushed toward a somewhat later date, closer to the turn of the era or even into the following century. This matters for how confidently we can speak about influence flowing in one direction versus the other, but it does not undermine the broader, more important point that Jewish apocalyptic thought in this general period, across multiple texts and communities, was independently converging on remarkably similar ideas about a heavenly judge bearing this specific title. The parables of Enoch are not, by any measure, gentle or comforting reading throughout. Alongside their genuine vision of hope for the righteous and the oppressed, they contain some of the sharpest, most pointed warnings found anywhere in the entire Enochic tradition, aimed quite deliberately and squarely at kings, at the mighty, and at wealthy landowners who oppress the ordinary faithful beneath them. The text describes these specific powerful figures as denying the very name of the Lord of Spirits, placing their ultimate trust in their accumulated wealth and their earthly thrones, and facing, on the promised day of judgment, a full reckoning they cannot possibly buy or bargain their way out of, however great their earthly power once was. It is language built entirely around stark, dramatic reversal, the humble deliberately lifted up, the mighty deliberately brought low, that scholars have long noted echoes forward remarkably closely into passages like Mary's song in the Gospel of Luke, where she declares confidently that God has brought down proud rulers from their very thrones and has correspondingly lifted up the humble in their place. Whether this striking similarity reflects genuine, direct literary dependence in either direction, or simply reflects a shared, common well of apocalyptic imagery already circulating broadly among Jewish communities of the period, is, once again, a question genuinely debated among careful scholars, without easy resolution either way. But the emotional and theological resonance between the two texts is nonetheless unmistakable to any careful reader. This is a tradition written, in very significant part, specifically for communities actively experiencing real oppression. Communities who urgently needed to hear that the current, unjust arrangement of earthly power was not permanent or final, and that a genuine day of accounting was still coming, however long delayed it might currently feel. Enoch, the man who simply walked with God and did not die in the ordinary way, becomes in this later, expanded tradition something considerably more than a curious genealogical exception buried in an old list of names. He becomes for these communities a kind of living guarantee, tangible proof offered to communities living under sustained foreign domination that God's reach genuinely extended beyond death itself, beyond the power of any earthly empire, beyond the entire visible order of the world as it currently unjustly stood. We should be careful, too, not to flatten this material into abstract theology, detached from real, lived circumstances. The parables repeatedly single out specific categories of oppressor: those who possess the land, those who control trade, those who exercise judicial power unjustly, suggesting the text emerged from a community with direct personal experience of economic and political exploitation, not simply a community engaged in speculative theorizing about the afterlife in the abstract. Read this way: the promised reversal isn't only a future cosmic event awaiting some distant day. It functions, in the present moment of the text's original audience, as a form of sustained resistance literature, insisting that the current social order, however entrenched and however permanent it might currently appear, was neither inevitable nor eternal. For many centuries, most of the Western world lost direct, meaningful access to one Enoch almost entirely. As the mainstream Jewish and Christian biblical canons gradually solidified without including it, surviving copies became genuinely rare outside of essentially one place on earth: Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church carefully preserved the complete text as authentic scripture, written in the ancient liturgical language of Ge'ez, continuously, for well over 1,000 uninterrupted years, even as the text largely vanished from view almost everywhere else across the Christian and Jewish world. The text remained largely unknown to European scholars until the 18th century, when a Scottish traveller named James Bruce returned from an extended journey through Ethiopia, carrying copies of the complete text with him, effectively reintroducing it to Western academic study for the first time in centuries. But the specific discovery that ultimately transformed serious scholarly understanding of the book came somewhat later, and from an entirely different, unexpected part of the world. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, first discovered beginning in 1947 in remote caves near Qumran, archaeologists eventually found Aramaic fragments of several distinct sections of 1 Enoch, dating by careful paleographic analysis to as early as the 3rd or 2nd century before Christ. This crucial discovery confirmed, decisively and beyond reasonable scholarly doubt, that the text, or at the very least significant substantial portions of it, was genuinely ancient genuinely Jewish in origin and genuinely in active circulation among precisely the same communities that produced other scrolls found nearby at Qumran, communities who were themselves living in active, urgent anticipation of imminent divine judgment. A text carefully preserved for over 1,000 years by one single faithful community on a remote mountain plateau in East Africa, independently confirmed as genuinely ancient by fragile scrolls hidden away in desert caves and then completely forgotten for roughly 2,000 years. Two entirely separate, unconnected threads of careful preservation, converging unexpectedly to verify the very same ancient visionary tradition on opposite sides of the ancient world. That remarkable convergence is, in its own quiet way, as genuinely striking as anything actually contained within the text itself. So what should we ultimately make, after all of this, of Enoch, the man who simply walked with God, the visionary who toured the far reaches of the heavens, and the likely source, whether directly or only indirectly, of language and imagery that would go on to echo forward meaningfully into the Gospels themselves? The most honest and responsible answer is not that 1 Enoch represents some form of secret scripture that was deliberately hidden from ordinary believers by design. Its ultimate exclusion from most official biblical canons reflects centuries of careful, deliberate theological discernment by working Jewish and Christian communities, not active suppression or conspiracy. Its core ideas were never actually lost to history in any meaningful sense. They were instead preserved, studied, debated, and, in the specific case of Ethiopian Christianity, treated openly as genuine scripture, continuously, in plain sight, the entire time, for well over a millennium without interruption. What this remarkable story ultimately offers us is something quieter, and in some genuine ways, considerably more moving. Clear evidence of just how seriously ancient communities took even the smallest, most easily overlooked details embedded within their sacred texts. 5 short verses, a single broken pattern in an otherwise rigid genealogy. One man who simply did not die like everyone else around him, and an entire elaborate visionary tradition grew organically from the empty space that silence deliberately left behind. A tradition that ultimately offered genuine hope to the oppressed, sharp warning to the powerful, and specific theological language that later writers, whether consciously or not, would go on to carry forward into their own story of a promised judge and deliverer they too would eventually come to call the Son of Man. It's worth remembering, finally, that this pattern of careful, sustained attention to brief scriptural silences was not unique to the story of Enoch within Jewish tradition. Similar expansive traditions grew up around other figures, given only sparse treatment in Genesis, around the mysterious priest-king Melchizedek, mentioned in only a handful of verses, yet later the subject of extensive theological reflection in both Jewish and Christian writing, and around Elijah, another rare biblical figure, said to have been taken up rather than dying an ordinary death. Enoch's story, read alongside these others, reflects a broader ancient conviction that Scripture's silences were not empty, but were themselves a kind of invitation, carrying meaning worth pursuing carefully, generation after generation. We began tonight with a man who broke the established pattern of an ancient genealogy, a man who lived and walked faithfully with God for centuries, and simply was not, because God himself had taken him. We end somewhere considerably deeper, with a tradition that took that brief, unexplained silence seriously enough to fill it carefully with burning mountains of fire, hidden storehouses of stars, a throne of final judgment, and a title that would echo forward, many centuries later, from the mouth of Jesus himself, spoken again and again throughout his public ministry. Enoch never once explains himself within Scripture. He simply appears in the text, walks faithfully for 300 years without further comment, and is then taken. No death is recorded. No proper ending is given. Only an unfinished sentence that later generations, genuinely hungry to understand what lay beyond the ordinary visible world around them, could not resist trying to complete for themselves, generation after generation, community after community. Perhaps that is the real prophecy quietly hidden within Enoch's brief story. Not some secret, detailed timeline of specific future events waiting to be decoded, but rather a simple, enduring conviction, faithfully carried forward by devoted communities across 3,000 years and two entirely different continents. That walking faithfully with God, even within a world otherwise thoroughly defined by mortality and loss, might genuinely be the one path that was never actually meant to end in an ordinary, unremarkable grave.